Mirë se erdhët në Public Square, unë jam Ditmir Bushati. Para disa vitesh, një prej shkencëtarëve më të njohur politik, Peter Mayer, shkruajti një libër cilin e titulloi Të qeverisësh në boshllëk. Një libër i cili ngjante shumë me romanin e Saramagos, Verbria, ku pak a shumë trajtonte apatinë e sistemeve politike, apatinë e qytetarëve për kundrejt padrejtësive politike dhe zhvillimeve politike në vend. Mirë po, disa vite më vonë, po kuptojmë që nga një sistem demokratik i organizuar, edhe demokracitë perëndimore janë zhvendosur nga demokraci liberale, në disa raste në demokraci jo liberale. Në disa raste tjera nga demokracitë e audiencës, pra të njerëzve, të organizimeve, të town halleve, të dëgjesave publike, në një demokraci digjitale, ku rrjetet sociale, ku lufta brutale për klikime, ku emocioni, ku polarizimi politik dhe shoqëror, i gjithi zhvillohet dhe nxitet në këto rrjete sociale. Mirë po, këto platforma janë të përqendruara rreth një grushti të vogël njerëzish. Edhe pse impakti i tyre në zhvillime demokratike, në përzgjedhjen e qytetarëve, është gjithnjë e më i rëndësishëm. Këtë vit ishte një vit mjaft i rëndësishëm për shumë procese zgjedhore, sidomos në Europë, në Gjermani, në Poloni, në Rumani, pse jo edhe në Shqipëri. Dhe për të analizuar raportet mes demokracisë, platformave sociale dhe zhvillimeve demokratike në Europë dhe jo vetëm, kam të ftuar Radu Magdin, i cili është një analist me zë shumë të qartë për këtë çështje në Rumani dhe ish këshilltar i disa kryeministrave në Rumani dhe në Moldavi. Dear Radu, it's a pleasure to have you on Public Square.
It's a pleasure to be here. Many thanks.
We have seen an election cycle in Europe with elections in Germany, in Romania, in Poland, also in my own country, Albania, but we have seen also election cycles in Canada and Australia, where you get the impression that it was a battle between MAGA on one hand and the liberal stream on the other hand. I know that you are dealing a lot with elections, with strategies, and with analysis, and I would be interested to start our conversation by asking you a specific question in relation to the main lessons that can be drawn from this political situation.
First of all, I would say that because environments are very different, of course, the same recipe does not apply everywhere. So sometimes, in the vast majority of cases, in fact, if you frame this as MAGA versus liberalism, you could say that MAGA was pretty much defeated. But there is one notable exception in Poland, and because Poland is an important country, of course, the symbolism of having a Polish president who is officially part of the MAGA network matters. Right, so I would say political endorsements have always been there. I remember more than 18 years ago when I joined European politics in the European Parliament, the EPP parties were supporting EPP-affiliated, the EPP family was supporting EPP-affiliated parties. The S&D group would support Social Democrats, and the Liberals would support the Liberal parties, and so on. So this was always done, but I would dare say not in an aggressive way. By aggressive, I mean by really trying in a way to push, to nudge the country to vote in a specific way. What's different now is that although normally, let's just say, Democrats communicate with progressives, Republicans in the US would connect with right-wing circles, because of the specifics and ambitions of MAGA, there was more of a push to see regimes, via elections across Europe, which would be more compatible with Donald Trump and with MAGA in the US. This only worked for Poland, but it's also interesting from this perspective to study the constitutional arrangements around the world. Because, for example, a Romanian president goes to Brussels in the European Council, but in Brussels in the European Council, you still have the Polish prime minister, not the president who goes to Brussels. So in terms of Brussels relief, even though there was a different result in Poland than in Romania, in terms of actual consequences, it's almost the same, because it's still Tusk who represented Poland in Brussels, for example, in the European Council, and it's Nicu Șordan, the new Romanian president, acting there. So I would say we're more direct. Things are clearer with MAGA, in the sense that MAGA comes in. Of course, the others can come in as well on the progressive side. But fundamentally, things haven't changed in terms of global endorsements, because it's normal for everybody to keep trying to promote their own political family.
Things are more direct and things are more clear, and I would agree with you. But on the other hand, we have witnessed also the elections that were cancelled in the case of Romania by the Constitutional Court. On the other hand, we have seen in Poland a big fight between two main camps. And this raised concerns also about money being poured in the election process by outsiders, and we have seen lots of accusations in this respect. Whereas in the case of Germany, we have seen also the fact that AfD was labeled somehow as a threat to democracy by intelligence service, and all these were somehow echoed in the words of Vice President Vance during his speech in the Munich Security Conference. Whereas in the case of Albania, I have to add, although not all these countries are part of the same, let's say, template, we have seen an election campaign by the opposition modeled after MAGA, and the chief strategist of MAGA and of Donald Trump was the chief advisor of the opposition in Albania. So what are these trends telling us for the future of our continent, first and foremost?
I think, first of all, an important lesson to learn is that people are stubborn. What do I mean by this, people are stubborn? I mean, we all have our affinities, and I think Romania and Albania are very similar from the perspective of our respect and affection towards the Americans. I honestly believe that a lot of countries in Eastern Europe have more affection than some of the countries in Western Europe. And so, I mean this separate from wider transitional countries' aspiration and respect for might. And I think both Romania and Albania, for example, are very much aware, as in Germany and other countries, that the US, although we're facing a multipolar period in history in which we see power diversification and great power competition, still we are seeing US continued might. How much this might may continue and this power may continue, it remains to be seen. It could be 5 years, it could be a decade, it could be more, depending also on the competition to our American friends and partners. But then people separate things and they also look at the candidates. What do I mean by this? Let's just say there is a MAGA endorsement to somebody in Romania. Yes, there was a candidate who said, I want to be part of MAGA. I am part of MAGA. I'm going to CPAC meetings. I want to be Donald Trump's candidate. But it doesn't necessarily mean that although Romanians are pro-American, although Romanians may like or not President Trump, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will become my president just because you're saying you're one of the Trump team, right? So you can see people separate from this perspective. I would say an American endorsement will always be an advantage, but it's never enough. So from the perspective of the Romanian electoral campaign, at least, I would say it was a win for President Dan, for the current president Nicu Șordan, but it also was a loss for Mr. Simeon, because Mr. Simeon did a lot of mistakes in between the first round and the second round of elections. So you could say, yes, indeed, it may have been a bonus for him that he presented himself as the Americans guy or the Trump guy, but on the one hand, he lost on a lot of other flanks as well. As regards speaking about people's autonomy and people's stubbornness, please note this also as regards the Germans, the Canadians, the Australians. From this perspective, these countries, who are pretty self-confident, they perhaps, from their perspective, it was a little bit too much. It was believed also as foreign meddling, all these nudges to vote a specific candidate. As regards Poland, I think this example is pretty specific. Also because on the one hand, the elections are very local. The Polish are pro-American, but I don't think the problem in between the elected president, Mr. Nawrocki, and the other candidate, the mayor of Warsaw, was that the current president, is a MAGA guy, But I think it was more about this Polish context. Polish society is mild conservative in its majority, and the conservative candidate managed to do a more convincing case to become president than a progressive mayor of Warsaw, who is, by the way, a great progressive mayor of Warsaw, but overall, he did not connect with the wider Polish society. So I would dare say that the MAGA argument was not necessarily the definite one for winning or for losing across countries. I think that at least for the German case, because I follow closely German politics, I think a lot of my German friends were a little bit pissed off, to put it in a very elegant way, about not necessarily about Mr. Trump, but about Mr. Musk keep trying to intervene, and tweet and retweet and do all kind of online meetings with the AfD leadership. So it was too much in a sense that it seemed like as if we're being pushed to vote in a specific direction. And this is what we call, as you well know, backlash. Sometimes there is a backlash when people have the feeling that there is too much support for a specific candidate.
Radu, 2 or 3 years ago, this was not a topic at all, the American interference or the American endorsement. Usually in the European elections or in countries that you know it much better than I do, like Moldova, for instance, or in Georgia, or in Ukraine, but also in other countries in the Western Balkans, one of the main concern was the Russian influence in the election process. And there has been also voices saying that we need to strengthen the resilience and the international institutions such as Council of Europe or EU, also on how to deal with international interferences on the elections in order to protect the integrity of the election process. Do you think that the integrity of the electoral process has been saved in the countries that we are analyzing together?
Indeed, you're perfectly right. I think issues related to resilience of our environment are key nowadays. And what's weird, I think, for a lot of us in Europe is, first of all, that we see a coincidence of interests in between some of the parties who were historically supported by the Russians, because the Russians have always supported extremes, whether to the left or to the right, because extremes always help with additional polarization and conflicts in a society. And now we don't see a coincidence of our American friends and allies on the extreme left, but we see a coincidence of them trying to promote, at the same time with the Russians, some extreme right parties. Now, I don't think we should underestimate our friends and partners. For sure, MAGA networks, or at least officials who are sympathizers of this network nowadays in power, they have been briefed by the US system on the fact that, for example, AfD and other parties may have taken money or may be influenced by Russians in the past. But I don't think they care. And this is an update, right? So it's a matter of national security for us to do our own shield, our own protection, our own resilience. From my perspective, I think that measures like the ones taken by Romania in December should be very carefully thought about, because we're paying a high price, and we paid a high price in terms of country credibility because of this measure. Election canceling it's not an easy decision, because then you really have to make the case as a liberal democracy. Why did you do it? The gravity of the situation must explain it. From my perspective, I think that Romania, like other liberal democracies, we were too confident. And this is a lesson for everyone around the world in a liberal democratic environment. It's when you're too confident, you risk being tricked at home, because what happened in Romania is a test case around the world, in the sense that you can play the online environment, particularly if you're very exposed to the online environment. And I believe from this perspective, there's a huge difference between Albania and Romania, because Romania has a vibrant TikTok environment, whereas you have a ban, even a temporary ban, I believe, on TikTok, right? You can use the other networks and so on. So our surprise came that we had a candidate back in November/December last year who literally jumped a few percentage points each week during the campaign just because of TikTok hype. My problem, for example, with Mr. Georgescu, back then a candidate, was less that he tried, he didn't a certain exposure via TikTok, or this was part of a wider operation. But my problem was what he declared about campaign finance. Because, and this is something we learned from our American friends, campaign finance should be very transparent. For the rest, in terms of resilience, I think not only Eastern Partnership countries who were historically tested by Russian propaganda or disinformation, or Western Balkan countries are also in their own way vulnerable to different information operations, like all liberal democracies. I would dare say we should be very careful on how we fight for our democracy. And this is a lesson for parties. Parties should be very competitive. They should really try their best. Because when parties don't do their best, when parties, they don't really try to have good political communicators, then we're really vulnerable to talented populists. We're really vulnerable to messaging, which is simple, which is emotional, which comes at the right moment in time based on social economic frustrations or wider, let's say, mainstream political party frustrations. So, for example, in Romania, the fact that even when we had a rematch of presidential elections, although we didn't have a final with the same candidates, we still had the final of two candidates who are anti-system, whether nice anti-system or bad anti-system, it's still a problem. It means that the majority of the population does not believe in mainstream parties any longer. And I think this is a lesson across Europe. Be careful as mainstream parties how you handle citizens, how you communicate with them, how you respect with them, because the citizens can turn against you. They can become radical.
So you would agree with those who are arguing that we have passed somehow the age of party democracy and now we are in a much more vibrant political environment where anti-system, nice or bad guys can become successful and they can capitalize on people's anger?
Indeed. First of all, it's a very populist decade by design. What do I mean by design? The social, economic, political context allows for all these poorly crisis, so several crises, and perma-crisis, permanent feeling of crisis. Honestly, they put a lot of pressure on people. And it's very easy after several years of disenchantment. I mean, look at this decade. Let's be very human, not analytical. I mean, let's be citizens. It started with a health crisis. Some of us thought we could die. Some of us lost dear ones. Then we had economic crisis of that. Then we had the war on Ukraine. Then we had the economic crisis on that, an energy crisis. Now, honestly, this week we see what regional tensions also in the Middle East, which can affect global markets. They can increase the risks of global recession. So it's really a horrible decade for a lot of the citizens. It's like a never-ending nightmare. And of course, desperate times not only call for desperate measures, but they also allow for desperate people to have desperate choices. And this is one aspect. The second aspect is, I loved a lot what a very smart UK professor, Professor Davis, says, that we are also witnessing a multi-decade realignment in the sense that a few decades ago, after the Second World War, we were based on ideology. Conservatives, social democrats, liberals, and so on, right? And class and the economy was an issue, right? So, for example, social democrats, redistribution, right? Liberals or conservatives, different versions of society, but mostly, let's say, liberal on the economic flank. Interestingly, Donald Trump in the US, he combines these these trends, and he realigns things. So, for example, the Democrats a few years ago, they were very certain that they would win elections forever. Why? Because Democrats, they were a combination of minorities. And they believed that the US is a set of clear minorities right now. But see, minorities are also identitarian. So I can be part of the Spanish-speaking minority, for example, in the US, but I can be Catholic, which means that Donald Trump talked to me about abortion. Although the Democrats counted on me to vote as a minority, I voted as somebody who is religious on abortion with Trump. So things are becoming more and more complicated.
So does this mean that we are moving from an audience democracy towards a digital democracy? And if so, what would be the main consequences as we see the concentration of social platforms in very few hands, like we have seen also in the case of US, the impact of X and Elon Musk in the elections?
Indeed, we are not only connected, but I would dare say we're hyper-connected. And this creates a certain online fatigue. And as mentioned, it consolidates our nervousness and it consolidates our polarization in our echo chambers, in our tribes, online tribes and offline tribes. Romania was away from this polarization, for example, which we have seen in the US in Trump 1.0 mandate, and it has continued ever since under Biden and Trump 2.0. Now, Romania is also very polarized, and I'll give you a number in this sense. More than 40% of the Romanian population believes that elections were not correct last time, which from my perspective as an analyst is not true. But this is an evidence of the polarization in society. So the sympathizers, most of the sympathizers of the camp that lost believes that the elections were not correct, which means we have a problem in this polarization. Like in between us, it also happened with Trump at the end of Trump 1.0, right? When the president back then said, I don't recognize the result of the elections. So and this creates a democratic problem also for the current government, which is being assembled just these days in Romania. I would say, unfortunately, we're paying a price also for the business and the money which is being done out of these platforms, online platforms, because these platforms are built on emotion and they're built on polarization. So they encourage, combat. Sometimes some of the people, and I've had this experience as an analyst, sometimes some of the people who can be very violent and very critical towards you in the online ecosystem, then they see you in the street and they say, hello. And they smile, right? But they swore on you a day before, right? Or they totally bashed you, or they put screenshots or whatever, and so on. So it's like a matrix. Now, I would say that this situation is only going to get worse in the short term, because unless the situation becomes untenable in terms of perceptions, only then will there be enough political, let's say, will to talk with the platforms and try to find a software solution, let's say, for less interaction. I'll give you a recent funny example with Blue Sky. There was news this week that Blue Sky wasn't really taking off. And the answer in that interview from one of the experts was there wasn't enough polarization. So this is an irony. People left X and went to Blue Sky because they wanted more peace, but then peace doesn't sell. Peace did not really help that network to take off.
Then how comes Nico Sardan was elected president? Because it was a polarized political environment. To me, it doesn't look like an anti-system. So to me, he's a normal politician, the way how he speaks, the way how he acts, and for things he stands. What's your view on that?
First of all, he's an atypical mainstream politician because he's an independent, which allows his, let's say, not necessarily full anti-system side, because this is why I said nice anti-system, but the idea that he's the change candidate from this perspective, right? So you have somebody who is in good relations with mainstream parties, but nonetheless is independent from the mainstream parties. Thereby, most of the population are okay with him. Then you have on the other side somebody who is the exponent of this, let's say, great combination of fear and hate, which is partially accumulated in Romanian society. A lot of people are resentful because on one hand, they believe the political class has done a lot of mistakes. So this is justified, legitimate issues. And then there is also a certain frustration to part of Romanian society because they believe themselves that they are not part of the winning process of this transition to democracy and transition to capitalism. Romania is immensely rich compared to how poor we were. But nonetheless, if you are less well off in a richer Romania, you believe you're one of the losers, although you're richer than you used to be 20 years ago or 10 years ago, right? Everything in life is by comparison. Like envy is human, right? And you want to have more, and you have the feeling that other people have much more than you. You consider yourself a loser of the transition. So Nico Jordan has had a positive pitch, but also his opponent made a lot of mistakes. And some of the mistakes were done by his opponent, and some of the mistakes were direct mistakes. And some of the opponents were done by his backer, Mr. Georgescu, who was like a shadow guy, the former presidential, candidate who on the cancelled round. So Georgescu, for example, antagonized a lot of people like me in the middle class. He was very populist in the last week. And in his endorsement towards Simeon, he criticized, for example, people who wear blue, who have money for blue jeans and bananas, hinting that, we have money for blue jeans and bananas, but there are people who don't have such money. And a lot of us in the middle class who were poor before, but we worked so hard to achieve our current life, we say like, who are you, talking that? You're just a guy with no revenue who is living in a villa in Vienna for a decade and trying to teach us what to do. So he antagonized a lot of us in the middle class who came to vote against Simeon. So there was a big negative vote, right? And then Simeon, unfortunately for him, he became too violent in the last week. He also did things which I think shouldn't be said. I mean, Mr. Dan, for example, he's a mathematical genius. Of course, like all geniuses, he's an introvert. And Simeon said he's autist. I mean, whether that's true or not, it doesn't matter. You don't say something like that. So he clearly offended in a very heavy way his opponent. And a lot of people felt an outcry. Separate from that, and this is interesting, I think, as a global trend. We see in Romania, women are much more educated nowadays and have more access to education than men. You can be a successful man, but for example, be a plumber or not necessarily be a lawyer, or an engineer or something else. But women in Romania, for example, we have a higher percentage of women going to college than men. Women are more educated nowadays in Romania, and not only Romania but also in other countries. We have part of the men who are frustrated that they no longer have access to these educated women, because educated women, in a majority of cases, they want educated men, or they stay single, right? So this is why there is an audience in Romania and other countries for people such as Andrew Tate, one of the influencers in the MAGA network, right? And speaking of influences cross borders, so Simeon, like Tate brothers, like other people in this network, they totally antagonize a lot of the women in Romania. And one of the secrets for Nicu Jordan was that women came to vote. And women came to vote for Nicu Jordan and against a candidate, Simeon, which they considered a hooligan.
You're speaking about blue jeans and banana, and this reminded me the last years of the communism, where we were somehow dreaming about these things, including Coca-Cola for sure, and we were also thinking in the first years of the democratic transition that liberal democracy is something for granted. Later on, we were exposed also with this idea of illiberal democracy. Now we are speaking about the shift from an audience democracy to digital democracy, which is coming with lots of consequences, of course. As a political analyst, if you have to define the area we are entering, the next decade or the next decades, what would be your definition about democracy and about the economic governance we will be living in?
First of all, I think democracy is a lot in the future. Democracy is a lot about communications. And we really need to keep in touch with our people. We really need to explain to our people what we're doing in government. Because if we're not explaining to our people what we're doing in government, then of course there can be a flurry of conspiracy theories, which is by the way, one of the phenomenons which we're seeing nowadays: fake news, conspiracy theories, different layers of disinformation. So I would dare say it's really, really important to be courageous enough to make the time and savvy enough to make the time and to explain in a simple way to our population what's going on. And I would give an example in this sense, Dimitri. Singapore. I'm a big admirer of leaders of Singapore. In COVID, in other moments in time, they do a simple speech of around 5 minutes in which they try to explain to the population what's going on and what they're trying to do. Then there is a follow-up. I don't know, 2 weeks, 1 month, whatever. Again, they come in front of the population and they say, my fellow citizens, this is the situation, this is what we're doing, right? So you need to tell the people what you're doing. If we consider that our audience is dumb, and I'm sorry but we are in a vicious circle in some democracies. I think our politicians, they don't trust the media and they don't trust the population. And the population and the media, they don't trust the politicians, right? So we're seeing like a vicious circle instead of turning it into a virtuous circle in which, yes, the media should be critical. This is the role in democracy. But we should use the media or direct channels to try to explain to the people what we're doing. I think people deserve respect. If we give them respect, if we use all the platforms available, then it's important. And I'll give you one final example, which is, of course, different from the example of Albania because TikTok is no longer available, or at least for a while in Albania. We have TikTok grandmas in the countryside in Romania. It's incredible. But because the grandson or the granddaughter, they gave to grandma, a smartphone, grandma in the countryside is watching TikTok, separate from videos on WhatsApp from the grandson or from the son or daughter or whatever, right? So nowadays, we should really be careful about how we communicate with the population because we really need to get our message across. And I think this is a trait of good communications. If we're not doing that, I'm afraid this is going to be a very populist next few years.
Radu, it was a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much.
It's me thanking you.